Welcome back to the next part of this tutorial series on how to use React. In this series, we're going to build a working chess application with the React.js framework. And hopefully you've already followed along a little bit or quickly skipped through the introduction video in which I talk about how to get set up with React and how to sort of just get your environment started. So in this video, we're going to take that initial application that they give us, and we're going to turn that just into the most basic form of the beginnings of a chess game. And then in the next part, we're going to start to expand the features that we have in order to use that. So if you followed along with the last video, you might have found yourself creating a couple of directories, and you might have started an NPM React server. And if you did, you just want to quit out of that by hitting Control-C. And then you can change directories up a couple of directories and remove any extra things that you need, because we're not going to need that. I've got a few canned examples that we're going to follow along with at each step of the way. And to do that, what you need to have in order to kind of get going with this video, if you've already got Node and you've already got NPM, the next thing you're going to need is something called Git. -- version. Now, Git is what's called a source control management system, or a revision management system, or a version control system. There are a lot of versions of this, one of the oldest being something called CVS, which was sort of replaced by Subversion at some point. And now the most popular one is this system called Git. One of the things that helps when you're working with Git is actually to have an online account to share your Git repositories and to use other people's code. I use a system called GitHub. GitHub allows you to host a repository. You can see I have a bunch of repositories that I've either created or forked from other projects. So let's go into this ChessLab one. If you go to this URL, github.com jalavetsax/ChessLab, then you find yourself here, and you may even want to create a GitHub account, but you don't have to do that right now. One of the nice things is you can download or clone this Git repository without having to have an account necessarily. There's this little green button here that gives you a URL. So what you'd find here if you check this out is a working, completed sort of up to part 7 or further, depending on how far in the future you're watching this. If this develops further, then there will be other things, but I'm going to encapsulate each one of these videos with a different part. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get the code from part 0 here. We're going to work until we get to the point where we're ready for part 1, and that's going to be the starting point of the next video. Once we get to part 7, we're going to have kind of a working little chess game that you can sort of play around with, and you'll have a few interesting features, and you should have enough to really get started with React to build your own things. So to get started with this, what you're going to want to do is be somewhere. You can see I'm in the directory code under my home directory. But if you run the command Git Clone and you give it this URL, you can see this little clipboard looking thing. If you click that, it actually copies onto your clipboard. You can paste this right into your terminal, and when you hit enter, it pulls down the master of sorry, I forgot to cd into the directory first. You know what, let me make this a little bit bigger. Make that a little more obvious what we're doing. Alright. So what we did first is we cloned the repository, And that created this directory for us that we could cd into. So now that we're there, we can take a look around. And you'll see, if we type git branch, that we're on the master branch. That's sort of the same thing as looking at this list of branches here. And we're on the master. Now the master's got much more advanced code than we want to look at right now. So what we want to do is we want to be able to go over to the other branch for part 0. Because part 0 is going to take us to a flat React right out of the box with no changes. So what we want to do is go and say Git Fetch Origin. Now origin in this case is GitHub. And if we say part 0 and specify the name of the branch, then we'll pull that down from GitHub. And now if we type git branch, oh, it doesn't show up yet, but we do git checkout part 0, and we type git branch, you'll see that we're now on part 0 there. So now that we're started, what we can do is we can do npm start, and you'll see you get an error there, right? And the reason is because if you look at part 0, branch part 0, you see that there's a source and a public, but there's something missing. And the thing that we're missing is, of course, node modules. And in order to get node modules, what you do is we actually have a list of what we need installed in this file right here. So somebody needs to go and put all this stuff that we need in node modules. And the way to do that is just to do npm install. So this is going to pull down everything that we need to run our little program. And once that's done, we can just type npm start and we're off to the races. And you can see it managed to get over 1,500 different libraries. It even tells you how many people worked on them and how much code was audited for security. So we hit enter on that. Starting the development server, that's good. We open Firefox, that's fine. There we go. We're right back to sort of the starting case here, so we can just make that a little smaller off to the side. And we're ready to go here. So now we can do some work. I'm going to close this for now. We want to open up Visual Studio Code again. And as long as we deleted the directories we were already in, we're going to come back to this welcome screen. But you might have to close a folder and come back into this. And you can either do open folder here or open folder here. It doesn't really matter which. So what we want to do is pick this new ChessLab directory. And just like in the first video, this is going to open this up. We can close our little welcome screen there. We can go into the source. It says edit source app.js, and then we can save and reload. Let's give that a shot. We'll do our simple change again. And hit save. You can see a compile over there. And there's our simple change. So, oh, look at that. We can even kind of highlight. Look at that. So this is it's important to realize that this is actually kind of hiding a little bit from us. What we really want to be able to do is to build an application. This is just sort of rendering something. And this is a little bit simple for what we need. What we really want to do is create sort of a chessboard and be able to move pieces around. So the first thing we want to do is maybe get rid of, let's just go ahead and get rid of all this. This whole header here we can get rid of. save empties out. And let's just real quick show you sort of what the power of React is. Let's say we have a variable like x, and we're going to set that variable equal to my name. In React, if we have these little matching brackets like this, that tells it to not do sort of this HTML thing. It tells it to drop into a JavaScript mode. And we could just have it return things, like we could actually put X in there. And if we save that, oh, we're getting a little error. Logo is defined, okay. So we can actually just comment that out. There we go. See how that does. Yeah, it's happy again now. Ah, there we go. You can see there's the value of X gets printed out. So what you want to do is in this return function is figure out how you want stuff displayed, and then you sort of put in the little bits and pieces that you get from your program. So to get started with this, the first thing we need is a little bit of a board. But let me introduce you to what React looks like, the big pieces. So instead of exporting default down here, you actually don't need to do that. You can export default right up here. And a JavaScript function is fine, but it's a lot easier to use React if you do a fully fledged class. And then we can get rid of that because it's not a function anymore. And we got to do extends React.component. There we go. And now our return function doesn't make any sense. Get rid of that app. Because now we're in a class, and a class has to have functions in itself. And the special function that we're looking for here, the one that was sort of being called implicitly or automatically by the fact that it was a function, is called render. So if we sort of wrap our return in a render, React is automatically going to call our render function for us. React class render. It's automatically going to call this function as long as we've extended the React component. Now, this is already going to throw some people, but I can tell you this is the most sort of magic that we're going to get going through this. In a way, you just have to sort of trust me. This is a little bit of boilerplate that you're including. What we're doing is we're saying always default. This is our class name, and it's going to be this type of thing. And because it's a React component, it's going to have a render. So if we save this, everything should be hunky-dory. There it is. So there's a few other parts of a React class that make it start to become useful. One of them is a constructor. And if you're not sure what a constructor is, you can find other tutorials on object-oriented programming or JavaScript programming in general, but a constructor is just a way of setting up this object. So React, when it creates a new app, it's going to call this constructor first, and then it's going to call render. So a constructor gives us a chance to set things up one time. And in our case, what we want to do is we want to set up some state, but there's a little bit of boilerplate. We actually want to call the constructor for this thing too, so it helps to do that and call super like that. And super ends up just calling the constructor that was defined in this thing. So not too exciting. The real interesting thing in React is when we set a state. This .state, we're going to set that up here. And what we want is we want to have some rows, and we want it to be an array. Okay. So now when React comes in and creates an instance of our app class, it's going to run our constructor first, and then it's going to call render. And it's not doing it because of the order in this class. It's doing it because that's the order of things. It's going to run the constructor first and foremost. So this is a real important code to have for setup. And then this is code that does the actual instructions. Now let's say we did, let's say instead let's actually make a box. And we'll create a little divider. And actually, you know what? Let's go ahead and open the CSS for this too. So we're not necessarily going to get too deep into how CSS works here. You can look it up and Google it. You might see me Googling it every once in a while in this video series. But instead of app header, you know what? Let's do app body here. We'll save that. And we'll get rid of some of this spinning logo stuff. Let's get rid of that. It doesn't need to be that complicated. This is all Flexbox layout stuff you can look up yourself. Kind of a useful thing to have. We can go ahead and get rid of this too. We're not going to use that. So we've got a body, and you can see this class name thing links into that. So we can do class name equals app body. Let's save that. You can see it changed in the background there. So what we want to do is stick our chessboard in there. We'll start with one square, div class name equals cell. We'll call it a cell. And we'll do a div. We'll give it an Unclick to start with. Equals. React is real smart about this Unclick thing. See how that's a React DOM attribute? That means we can tie that to something in our React class. So we can actually define a special function here. And let's just call it something like select. Doesn't really matter what you call it, since you're the one who is calling it something. The important thing is it has to then match what you call it in the Unclick. So we want to wire up the fact that you're clicking on one of these boxes with like a white queen in it. We want to wire that up to this dot select. And you'll notice I'm not actually calling the method here with that. I'm just saying that's what you're going to call when there's a click. And we can test this. Let's go ahead and try this out. We'll do an alert here. We'll get an event. Clicked. How about that? Okay. There's our white queen and clicked. Okay. So you can see that there's a little bit of a process here in which we're just wiring up one little thing at a time. We don't want to start typing the whole chess program out. We want to make a little piece at a time and connect one thing to the next. So now that we can do that, what we want to be able to do is sort of display our board based on what our rows actually are. So let's just make a chessboard with 2 rows. And we'll just use a nested array for that. We'll do a white queen and a blank spot. And we'll do a black queen, black king, black queen, and a blank spot. Okay. So now the trick is to display this board in our application body. And the way to do that is that we can actually loop, but for right now, let's not get too far into that. We want to write a little bit. We could decide right now, okay, we're going to write some code to loop through this row set, or we could decide we're never going to do that and we hard code everything. You gotta, this is one of those early decision points where you're deciding what to work on next. We probably want to fill in more of this select function so we can build out more of the display once it's working. So maybe we want to limit the size of this board, and maybe we want to just have a few things going first. So let's start by specifying specific parts of this state rows. So we'll do the 0 by 0 location. Okay. And that gives us a white queen. And we can sort of copy this code and do it 3 more times. Okay. So the first row, that element, and then we can do the second row and the second element. There we go. So we have the 2 queens, and the way they're stacked up next to each other right now is just because we just have a plain divider here. So we're going to need to have a special divider here that accomplishes the row of this. And then we actually want to make a grid here, right? So we can make it look at least a little bit like we want it. Okay. So the trick is going to be, let's add a cell thing in our CSS. Let's just at least give it a border. 1px solid white. Save that. Save that. Okay, we've got a solid border. And we'll just float it left. Yep, okay, so they're next to each other. Well, we want them to be kind of a box, right? So let's give it a size. Let's call it width, I don't know, 70px. And we'll make it a box, same height, 70px. Okay. There we go. And we can even click on that one. Cool. So we can put that, we can click on any of them actually. Right? Oh, look, you can stop it. So, got some code here that's displaying our little chessboard. And we have a way to handle clicks, but we don't know where the user clicked. It's sort of doing the same thing no matter what, right? So our next trick is going to be to detect where they clicked. Okay, and the trick to that is just to take a look at what we got passed. We got passed something here. And one of the things you can do is you can console.log ev and you can see what it is. And if you hit Control-Shift-C, bring up the console down here. So let's see what happens when we click on this. Look at that object. Look at all this stuff. There we go. So we got a big thing out of this EV, and it's got all kinds of stuff in it. And you can look up the what that stuff is. And I did. The most useful thing in there is something called current target. So what you want to do is do ev dot current target, and when you do that, you'll see that you actually get an HTML element. That, look at that. Look what Firefox does. That's kind of cool. So that one. And we can get its attributes. We can get all kinds of stuff about it. One of the things we can get is its inner HTML. Let's see. Oh, nope, that didn't work. Why didn't that work? Oh, inner HTML. There we go. Ah, look at that. BQ. See that? So now when we click on any of these, we sort of know what the value was in there. And the trick is going to be figuring out, you know, what was the location that we clicked on. So what we want to do is use the grid to our advantage to figure out sort of where in this row matrix we are, because right now we've got the 0, 1 thing, and in the end what we're going to be displaying to the users is sort of a chess grid pattern, you know, A1 through H8 or whatever it is. But for now, all we have to do is just stick an ID on these, right? So if we do ID equals, we can do A1, and we'll do ID equals A2, ID equals B1, and ID equals B2. Okay. So now we've got what the value of the thing was, and we've got the ability to get our ID. So we can do, we can actually just say let ID equals ev dot current target ID. And what we can do is come up with some logic here based on that ID. So we could say if ID equals this dot. See, now what we got to do in some cases is determine if we're going to move these around, and we want to click on one and then click somewhere else where it's going to go, and then have it trade places with that location. So in order to do that, sometimes we're going to be sort of having already clicked somewhere, and sometimes we'll have not clicked anywhere yet, and we'll want to save that. Okay, so the way to do this is to capture that someone has clicked on something already. And we can do that with the state here by saying selected, and we can say selected starts off being null, which means nothing. And we can do if, we can do a check for, let's think about this. How could we unselect something? So let's say we clicked on WQ twice. You can see, by the way, if you click more than once here, you end up with this number here if it repeats the same output more than once. See this? We can get this little number down here to go up a bunch of times. But if we, I think what we're going to want to do is we're really going to have three things. Either we're clicking on something for the first time, we're clicking on the same box to sort of deselect it, or we're trying to click somewhere else at a target location to move it, right? So let's try and detect those just three cases. The first one being, are we clicking somewhere we've already clicked? So that would be this.state.selected. And otherwise, we're clicking somewhere else. But there's sort of this intermediate case where we're saying if there even is a previous one, right? So in this last case, what we want to do is we want to store the fact that we clicked somewhere. So to do that, React has a special function. It's called SetState. And it's a really important function because React does a lot of magic, cool stuff when you call SetState. Whenever you're up here in JavaScript land and you call SetState, you tell React to re-render what you've got going on. So we'll do selected ID. Okay. And in this case, we'll do this.setState. We want to clear it. So we'll say selected no. And you have to put this little, it's got to be a JSON object. So you create this special object by putting these little brackets around it. So this is a JavaScript function. We've wired it to a click down here in our rendered output. And then once setState gets called, render can get called again, so we can interact with this. And what we could do is we could do another div. Let's go ahead and output the fact that we've selected something. One of the tricks to that is, well, let's make a little space first, actually, and non-breaking space here. Give it a little bit of a margin, maybe. All right. So there's some logic we can apply with React. There's a little bit of a, you know, we have an if-else up here. But in React, what we really have is just like an if something should be displayed. And the way we do that is just by saying if this.state.selected with these two ampersands. Anything in there is going to get displayed if this thing exists. So once we set it, then it should display it here. And what we'll do is we can actually just say div. We just say this.state.selected. And we can have a little arrow because we're going to move it somewhere, right? So now we should be able to click on anything. Oop, we have something broken here. This is undefined. So this is a real common gotcha with React. And it's good that we ran into it early. I just happen to have run into it a bunch of times. It's so easy to forget to do this. React has this thing where you've got to bind these in the constructor so that React knows how to wire them together. Someday maybe they'll get past this, but it's kind of annoying. You just have to remember to do it. This.select equals this.select.bind this. So whenever you write one of these functions, you've got to remember to add up here with the binding call. So now this should work. Let's see. Okay. Oh, yep, there we go. Okay. Clear it. A1, A2. Now, you'll notice if we click two different spots, we're falling into this middle state. We're not doing anything. What we need to do is sort of trap the fact that we're going to move a piece. And we have to actually move it. So the way to do that, let's also then let's make another example of this before we get into that. See, sometimes we want to display two different things. This is the only way I find to do this in React. It's a little tedious, but if you want to display something when there's nothing, so this is empty, then we'll just display like a little dash or something down here. There we go. Okay. Save that. There we go. And we can toggle stuff in and out, but we can't move anything yet. So, in order to move stuff, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to swap the values from one location to another. And in order to do that, we have to kind of decode the fact that we've got an A1 and an A2 and a B1 and a B2. And the way to do that is to get the actual ASCII value of the character A and then just map it to 0. So I'll give you an example. Let's say we've got our case where we're actually moving a piece, right? What we want to do is we want to say let rows equal this dot state dot rows, and that way later we can do this dot set state selected null, right? Clear that out, and then we can say rows once we swap the rows. So in order to do that, we've got to have a sort of an X and a Y for the two locations we're swapping. And the way to think about this is, this is a good time to pop open a new terminal window, type node, and play around with this a little bit. You can do, it turns out if you Google it a little bit, you find that there's this function called car code at. So let's say we did A1 dot car code at 0 65. That's just the ASCII code for A. If we did the same thing with B 66, C 67, right? And then if we had a 2 here and we did the ASCII code for that value, then you'll see that actually, let me set this back to 1. That's going to be a 49. So those values, 65 and 49, are sort of the 0 point of A or 1. And we can use that as sort of an index into the fact that we're going to have an A or 1 as our IDs, right? But those cell locations in a chess game, A1, B2, whatever, those don't necessarily correspond to array indexes, right? So in order to get those indexes, what we want to do is say let row 1 equal, and we're going to be going from somewhere first, right? So this dot state dot selected, so that's sort of what we clicked on first that we saved. We select it, we say dot car code at 0, and we can say minus 65. So if this is an A, we're going to get 0, which is what we want. We want to have a zero-based index here. So let column1 equal this dot state dot selected car code at 1 minus 49. So that gives us the 2 array slots of where we clicked first. Now we need where we clicked just now. We have an ID, so we do let row 2 equal ID dot car code at 0 minus 65. Let column 2 ID dot car code at 1 minus 49. And now we just need to swap them around. We'll say rows row 2, and we'll say call 2 equals, what we want to do is set the destination equal to what it is where we first had clicked on. So that's going to be call 1, call 2, and then we could, for now, we could just swap them around. So we could get a value here. Like we could say, let's see, we could use this inner HTML, right? Let value equal HTML. Okay. So rows column 1, that's going to be the value of where we clicked just now, right? Column, or it needs to be row 1, column 1 equals value. Now we could have saved off this thing as the value and put it there. But we have it here anyway. It doesn't really matter where you wanted to get it from. It might matter later, and I'll show you why. If we save this, let's see how we do. Create portal. What? Oh, look at that. That's weird. Let's get rid of that. Sometimes this editor gets a little overzealous. Save that, get rid of it. There we go. So let's see if we can swap these around now. Ooh, something went wrong. Okay. So let's try and figure out what went wrong here. Hold on, let's run this again. So it swapped the blank in, but it didn't swap in the value correctly. So let's try and do, let's console.log this a little bit, right? Value, right? Let's see, value BQ, value dash, okay. Ah, I see where, you see where our problem is here? I accidentally typed column 1, row 1, column 1, there we go. There we go. Hey, they flip now. So now that we're doing that, the only thing that's kind of missing is the visual feedback that we've actually selected something. And it would be kind of nice to get that. So if you look this up, one of the things you might run into is people suggesting, how can I get a reference to this element that I could get in JavaScript land, another way, because I also want to be able to get a reference to not only this guy that we clicked on here, right? But we also need a way to get the div cell of the other guy too, if we want to manipulate that. And what you come across is there's this way of keeping references in React, and you can accomplish this just by saying ref equals, and then having a bit of JavaScript here that says ref is a function that says this dot board refs equal dot a1 equals ref. Okay. A couple of things. One is that this function where we're just setting a value to this reference, we need to have a place for that. So we got to have a this dot board refs equals a thing, right? So that'll stick that one in there. And the nice thing is then we can use the ID to pick which one we want, right? So if we sort of stick this on all of these, we need to remember to change all these locations. B2, oops, there we go. B2, B1, A1, A2, there we go. And now that we've stored those there, what we can do is we can get a hold of that by getting a reference to the previously clicked one, or we can get a reference to the one we're on. So for instance, right now what we might want to do is say we might want to get the React reference. Let React reference equal this dot board refs, and we can just put the ID in there as a lookup. So if we click on A1, it'll pull the reference out for A1, and then we can do stuff like in this case we could say React reference dot class list remove. We got to come up with like a name for what we're going to call this, like cell selected. And then we could, in these other cases, okay, so let's say we're here, we want to do React reference dot class list dot add cell selected. Okay, so let's go to our CSS and we'll add cell selected, and we'll do, how about border 1px solid yellow. Okay, or hell with it, 2px. Right. So now that we've got that, oh yep, there we go. We've got a yellow, and we can toggle it on and off using this reference and toggling that on and off through the class list. But now the problem becomes if we do a swap. See, we kept this one yellow, and what we really need to do is have a reference to the previous one, which we can get by looking up the selected. So in this case we do let previous reference equal this dot board refs, and then we just need to give it the lookup. And in this case, the previous one, the one we clicked on last time, is stored. This dot state dot selected. Let's see what we got. Previous ref is assigned a value but never used. Oh, here we go. Right before we set state, we can do previous ref dot let's see, what we want to do is class list dot remove. There we go. Cell selected. Cool. So now we have some visual feedback about what's going on, right? Cool, huh? So the next step in this is going to be to give this a little bit more in terms of features. But that's a great introduction that at least shows you some of these working parts. We've got, the important thing is that we've got a class now. It's a React component type class. The constructor sets up the important things such as bound functions. It sets up anything we want to store as a particular reference, and it sets up the state. The state is what ends up getting rendered in this render function. And whenever there's a change to the state with a set state, render is going to get called. And we've also got now the ability to call a specific part of our class with the Unclick. And you can see our lines are starting to get kind of big. You'll see that you can, there's nothing stopping you from kind of cleaning things up a little bit. And in fact, you'll see that we actually have a little bit of a bug if I do this too much. There we go. I'm not sure if you realized it, but you can have all kinds of space breaking this up. But now we have a bug. And the reason is, let's see. It actually looks okay. The problem is we actually are capturing the value in this inner HTML with now a bunch of extra white space. So now we're setting the value in this row here. When you move stuff around, since you're swapping stuff around, you're gonna have actually, it's like a big bunch of, well, actually in HTML it's probably gonna look like spaces like this. And that's gonna screw up matching later or handling of whether or not this is an issue or not. But we'll get to that in the next, that's going to be the first thing we're going to tackle in the next video. And we're going to build out some more of these features. So stay tuned and thanks for coming along.